Hello friends. Europe is closing its doors. We have new rules from Brussels and unfortunately scandals involving Ukrainians in Germany. Brussels is striking at the temporary protection rules. Now newcomers will be required to provide military documents. While some will be looking for loopholes in refugee status, in Hamburg 200 police officers are storming a shelter because of fraud, and in Lower Saxony, compassion for tenants has turned into a loss of 100,000 euros. Right now, we're exposing the flip side of European humanitarianism in a new video. Please like and subscribe to the channel if you haven't done so yet. Friends, thank you so much for your support. To everyone who doesn't mind taking 2 seconds for these simple actions, thank you so much for the like and for the support. Yes, and to promote the video, comment "Bold guy, why aren't you at the front?" Well, let's get down to business. So the first news is about Ukrainian men of conscription age arriving in the European Union. They will start being asked for documents proving exemption from military service. This is reported by Ukrainska Pravda, citing sources in Brussels. So, dear friends, for those watching from Ukraine, there's still time to catch this departing train. So, we've explained how Europe plans to deny temporary protection. In other words, a preliminary decision on this has already been announced in the European Union. The refusal will affect not only men aged 23 to 60 who, according to Ukrainian law, are not allowed to leave the country. Men under 23 years old, as well as women who voluntarily joined the ranks of the armed forces of Ukraine, will also be denied temporary protection until they are discharged from military service. In addition, if a serviceman or someone liable for military service legally leaves for the European Union with the appropriate travel permit, but then does not return to Ukraine, he will also not be able to receive temporary protection. Exactly how this will be implemented technically is not explained in the article. In general, the decision to grant temporary protection will be made as follows. If a man aged 23 to 60 arrives in the European Union and applies for temporary protection, the authorities of the state will ask him to provide documentary proof of his legal right to leave Ukraine. That is, it will be necessary to provide a document that confirms exemption from military duty in Ukraine and therefore the right to legally leave for Europe. Friends, be sure to write in the comments what you think. Do Ukrainian men have the right to leave or not? Absolutely everyone should return, should work on rebuilding Ukraine and not engage in draft dodging. Comment below, should everyone return or do people have the right? Let's get back to the article. At the same time, it is reported that newly arrived Ukrainian men will also be able to apply for alternative types of protection in the European Union, that is, refugee status at the general level. Additionally, they can still apply after being denied temporary protection. Military personnel and those with special circumstances have higher chances of receiving asylum. This is reported by Ukrainska Pravda. Well, in short, it's a striking example of the dialectics of capitalist law enforcement. According to European Union regulations, service conditions that violate human rights or consequences related to evading military service can be equated to persecution under the Refugee Convention. For example, in cases of disproportionate or arbitrary punishment, discrimination, torture, religious conversion, as well as unlawful deprivation of liberty. If someone can prove they were abused in the army or at the territorial recruitment center, such as being put in a pit, they may qualify for refugee status and remain in the European Union. Or if they can prove that there are threats of cruel treatment. It would be interesting to see such cases in reality. Another reason why a man can apply for refugee status in the EU is conscientious objection, that is, a religious consideration, and also the impossibility of alternative service, for which Ukraine has long been criticized by international organizations. Well, nothing has changed. At the same time, sources confirm that the refusal will not apply to men who arrived earlier, including those who turned 23 while staying in the EU under temporary protection. There are no plans to revoke their protection or deport them back to Ukraine. Well, that's about it. That's about it, friends. Share your thoughts in the comments. This temporary protection section is pretty interesting, right? You arrived 2 days ago under the old rules, so everything works out for you. But if you arrive today, you won't get anything anymore, including Poland's great social benefits. Let's move on, friends. By the way, for your convenience, there will be time codes. And now we move on to indecency, to the indecency that is playing out in the blessed Federal Republic of Germany's migration and municipal sector. Sunny Germany. Let me know in the comments how the weather is where you are, warm or cold. This relates to the unusual heat. We have 33, a steady 33, it's normal. So let's analyze two recent stories without skepticism. We'll lay out the facts clearly. So we have two stories from Germany. Friends, here's the first one. There's a scandal with Ukrainians, 200 police officers targeting phantom welfare recipients. Let's start with a report from Hamburg, where a real police drama unfolded. On the morning of June 25, the Winterhude district took on a whole new look. 200 police officers and investigators cordoned off a large state refugee accommodation center. The press immediately started flashing sensational headlines. Well, let's get rid of the fluff. The essence of the claims is purely economic. That's it. The German judiciary is investigating large-scale fraud involving child benefits, Kindergeld, if I remember correctly, that's what it's called. The investigation is looking into about 150 specific cases. According to law enforcement, international organized crime groups may be behind the scheme, helping citizens of third countries to obtain fake documents so that, posing as, among others, Ukrainian refugees, they could receive social benefits in Poland and Germany for years. The police spent 2 hours methodically checking the documents of everyone at the facility, both parents and children. The Ukrainian House Humanitarian Project there was also included in the media coverage. Yes, of course, there were some sensational headlines, like all the Ukrainians were detained, but later, German authorities officially clarified that the most charitable organization had nothing to do with any criminal activity. It was the residential sections of the state center that were searched. But you know, like in the joke, the spoons were found, but the bad feeling remains. Write in the comments what you think, because in my opinion, the capitalist paradise turned out to be extremely vulnerable to ordinary shadow schemes. What do you think? Is this an isolated case or a systemic loophole in the European social security system that will now be patched up with mass raids? That's it. Write what you think. It's especially interesting for those watching from Germany. So next we have another piece of news. Municipal dismantling. How did compassion turn into a loss of 100,000 euros? Here, the second story is just everyday cynicism, which was publicized by the tabloid Bild. A resident of Lower Saxony, Natalie Schell, who herself moved to Germany from Kazakhstan as a child, decided to show solidarity and at the beginning of 2025 rented out an apartment of 140 square meters, not just to anyone but to a Ukrainian family with 6 children. Well, that's how it is. Not bad, right? And the family is quite large by today's standards, 6 children, and the apartment is also decent, not small, 140 square meters. There you go. But look, I'm relying solely on the text of the article. When the owner was away for a while, the tenants moved out, showing some impressive demolition skills in the process. They didn't just remove the sofas and cabinets, they gutted the apartment. The built-in kitchen, stove, oven, and all the plumbing from both bathrooms disappeared, including sinks, faucets, and even the toilet. What's more, the citizens of Ukraine even managed to dismantle and take away parts of the underfloor heating and the external units of the expensive heating system. The damage exceeded 100,000 euros. Natalie herself, of course, is in shock because friends are sending her screenshots from social media where her former tenants are posting photos from Ukraine showing how they're laying tiles in their new house. Well, I don't know, guys. Honestly, I think there are a lot of questions about this article. But still, at first glance, it looks like she just wanted to help people and ended up without heating and a toilet, losing 100,000 euros. Will the owner get justice in international courts, or should she give up on the money? Share your questions and opinions in the comments. And in general, maybe you have some interesting stories related to refugees. In general, if we put all this together, the picture that emerges is extremely pragmatic. Any large migration flows in such a system inevitably give rise to both criminal schemes involving state funds and plain old everyday predation at the individual level. German society lived for a long time under the illusion of total prosperity and order. Now, at their own expense and through their own experience, they are learning that the laws of economics and human nature work with the same cynicism. That's how it is. That's the way it is. That's the plain truth, my friends. So thank you very much for your attention. Leave likes and write comments. Be sure to mention the city you're watching from and what the temperature is there. A big shout out to the working class, turners, milling machine operators, and truck drivers. Write in. Greetings to the proletariat. Well, that's it. And by the way, I don't see myself as separate from the working class, just so you know. Not blue-blooded, just a regular working guy. So friends, thank you very much. Whoever watched up to this point is the channel's best friend. That's all for now. See you next time.